Hey everyone, this is a section from Baruch Knei-Paz's The Social and Political Thought of Leon Trotsky. This section is titled World Revolution, and it's in the chapter about Trotsky's conception of permanent revolution. So here we go. If, in the first place, Trotsky made the workers' seizure of power dependent on peasant support, in the last resort, the workers' retention of power and the future of socialism in Russia were to be dependent on the support of the European proletariat. Trotsky's analysis of Russian society had stressed, as we have seen, the advantages of backwardness, but it could not, and was not meant to, deny the ultimate reality of backwardness itself. Trotsky did not believe that socialism could be realized in any one country alone. How much more so was this the case in a country such as Russia? Thus, in the penultimate chapter of Results and Prospects, Trotsky felt compelled to declare this in emphatic terms, quote, "Without the direct state support of the European proletariat, the working class of Russia cannot remain in power and convert its temporary dominance into a lasting socialist dictatorship." End quote. I'm going to repeat that because it's all in italics. Quote, "Without the direct state support of the European proletariat, the working class of Russia cannot remain in power and convert its temporary dominance into a lasting socialist dictatorship." End quote. And in the last paragraph of the book, Trotsky repeated this warning, quote, "Left to its own resources, the working class of Russia will inevitably be crushed by the counter-revolution the moment the peasantry turns its back on the proletariat, or the working class of Russia. It will have no alternative but to link the fate of its political rule and hence the fate of the whole Russian Revolution with the fate of the socialist revolution in Europe." End quote. Trotsky, Results and Prospects. In between these two passages, Trotsky tried to show that the prospects of such a revolution in Europe, the prospects in effect of a world socialist revolution, were fully within the bounds of any realistic appraisal of the situation in Europe. What did Trotsky expect to happen? In the first place, Trotsky assumed quite reasonably that a workers' government in Russia would arouse more than a passing curiosity in Europe. It would, in fact, be seen as a direct threat to European stability, not only because it would bring to an end Europe's financial stake in Russia, but because it would also break the hitherto unchallenged universal power of European capitalism. A direct European reaction was therefore extremely probable, and this, in Trotsky's view, was a further reason why the workers in Russia, already besieged by the peasantry, could not hope to complete their revolution without the help of the European proletariat. But in that case, whether in fact they, quote, "carry the revolution onto European soil," end quote, by their own, quote, initiative, end quote, is irrelevant. But they will be, quote, compelled to do so by the forces of the European feudal bourgeois reaction, end quote. Trotsky, Results and Prospects. They will be compelled, in other words, to begin exporting their revolution, to become involved in the internal politics of other countries, to support the struggle of workers' movements elsewhere. Not loyalty to a world socialist ideal will motivate them, but their own interests, their own desire for survival. This in itself, however, did not guarantee success. The workers' government in Russia could assist the European revolutionary movement. The workers' government in Russia could not create the European revolutionary movement. The extent of the workers' government in Russia's success would, of course, depend on two factors beyond the workers' government in Russia's direct control: the resilience of the European bourgeoisie and the actual power of the European proletariat. As for the first, Trotsky believed that it was already on the brink of exhaustion, the European bourgeoisie. This was so, in Trotsky's view, not only for the well-known reason of fundamental economic instability, aggravated by a cruel competition for world markets, but the inability of the bourgeoisie to camouflage the bourgeoisie's interest, as the bourgeoisie had done in the past, under supposedly national aspirations and unity. Having placed, quote, "huge masses of men under arms," end quote, The bourgeois governments could not throw them into war without facing the prospect of rebellion. A national war, that modern means for detracting from, and even averting, internal disintegration, had become impossible everywhere. Quote, in the old capitalist countries, there are no, quote, national demands, i.e. demands for bourgeois society as a whole, of which the ruling bourgeoisie could claim to be the champion. The governments of Britain, France, Germany, and Austria are unable to conduct national wars. The vital interest of the masses, the interest of the oppressed nationalities, of the barbarous internal politics of a neighboring country, are not able to drive a single bourgeois government into a war which could have a liberating and therefore a national character. On the other hand, the interests of capitalist grabbing, which so often induce now one and now another government to clank its spurs and rattle its saber in the face of the world, cannot arouse any response among the masses. For that reason, the bourgeoisie either cannot or will not proclaim or conduct any national wars. End quote. Trotsky. Results and Prospects. Footnote. To anyone reading this after 1914, Trotsky's prognosis must have appeared bitterly laughable. But Trotsky's reaction to World War I would be that the mutual slaughter resulting, in effect, in defeat for all, only vindicated the bankruptcy of, quote, national wars. However, this would not, of course, explain the behavior of European social democracy or of the European working class. For more on this, see Chapter 8 below. End footnote. Should, however, war become unavoidable in Europe, it will, quote, inevitably lead to a European revolution, end quote. No one realized this better than the European bourgeoisie itself, and now lived, quote, in fear of the revolution of the proletariat, end quote. Trotsky. Results and Prospects. And this fact, according to Trotsky, testifies to the strength of the proletariat in the, quote, old capitalist countries. Quote, ... Even without the outside pressure of events such as war or bankruptcy, revolution may arise in the near future in one of the European countries as a consequence of the extreme sharpening of the class struggle. We will not attempt to build assumptions now as to which of the European countries will be the first to take the path of revolution. Of one thing there is no doubt, and that is that the class contradictions in all European countries during recent times have reached a high level of intensity. Intensivity is what it actually says. End quote. Trotsky. Results and Prospects. Trotsky admitted, however, that objective revolutionary conditions in Europe had been inadequately exploited by the various social democratic movements. In Germany in particular, the success of the Social Democratic Party had been its undoing. Having built a mass movement, had become more infatuated with the movement as an end in itself than with the ends for which the movement had been created. It had become conservative and inert. This was so much so that social democracy itself had emerged as an obstacle to revolution, preferring the gains of the moment to the risks of an open struggle for power. This was partly why, in Trotsky's view, the long-expected revolution in Germany had failed to materialize, why the center of working-class radicalism had shifted away from Europe and to the less organized but more active movements in the East. But Trotsky believed that a workers' revolution in Russia would have the effect of jolting the Western parties into action. In the case of Germany, it would make itself felt in two ways. Firstly, by sparking off rebellion in German and Austrian-held parts of Poland. Secondly, by providing the encouragement of a successful precedent. In the first eventuality, the attempt of the German and Austrian governments to put down the Polish rebellion would have to be met by the direct intervention of the Russian revolutionary government as a, quote, act of self-defense, end quote. The hazards of war for Russia, however, would be offset by the sure prospect that in such a conflict, Russia would gain the support of the German and American proletariat, thus instigating civil war in those two countries. Trotsky confidently predicted that, quote, a war between the feudal bourgeois, quote, a war between feudal bourgeois Germany and revolutionary Russia would lead inevitably to a proletarian revolution in Germany. End quote. Trotsky. Results and Prospects. This would happen against the background of the Russian precedent whose impact on the, quote, consciousness and temper, end quote, of the European working class would be such as to create the, quote, necessary prerequisites for revolution, end quote. Quote, the tremendous influence of the Russian Revolution indicates that the Russian Revolution will destroy party routine and conservatism and place the question of an open trial of strength between the proletariat and the capitalist reaction on the order of the day, ... The revolution in the East will infect the Western proletariat with a revolutionary idealism and provoke a desire to speak to its enemies, quote, in Russian, end quote, Trotsky, Results and Prospects. That Trotsky found it necessary to make so much, too much, as we know, out of the prospects of a, quote, world revolution cannot be attributed simply to Trotsky's intrinsic, quote, internationalism. To look at the matter in terms of Trotsky's character alone is to obscure the very particular source of Trotsky's theoretical and practical concern. Trotsky's emphasis on a general European conflagration grew not so much out of a European outlook as out of the specific problems of revolution in Russia. Trotsky's contemporaries also tied the fate of the Russian Revolution to that of Europe, but they assumed that Europe was still the revolutionary center of the world. Trotsky, in contrast, claimed that the center had in fact shifted eastwards. Trotsky was, following Parvis, the first to predict that a, quote, workers' government would come to power in Russia before a workers' government came to power anywhere in Europe. So, I fucked that up. Trotsky was, following Parvis, the first to predict that a workers' government would come to power in Russia before a workers' government did so anywhere in Europe. The theory of the permanent revolution represented an attempt to explain the logic and mechanics of this phenomenon. But the problem of maintaining a socialist government in Russia could not be resolved without reference to Europe. Backwardness carried a high price. Dependence, in the end, on others. Thus, in Trotsky's view, the age-old relationship of Russia to the West was to be resurrected in the 20th century, though with a new twist. Thus, the necessity for Russia of a world revolution was, in a sense, a legacy of Russia's past. For this reason, the world revolution was an inseparable part of the permanent revolution, its third and final, quote, act, or the ultimate link, as Trotsky saw it, between backwardness and the modern world. That's the end of the section. Thank you for listening.